Hey guys, good morning. Happy Father's Day, y'all. Who's wrestling with Joey? It's got to be Jim, right? Where'd Jim go? That boy, he needs to be wrestled with, I think. So we started the book of Numbers this week. How'd you guys do? Holy cow! It's rough, isn't it? Yes. Imagine having to teach about it. No, it's going to be good. I think that there are lessons to be learned even from a book that really takes a lot of thinking, and it's not one of the books that just magically absorbs into our head. Let me give you some context to explain where we are at in, the history of Israel. So the Israelites are now kind of camped at the base of Mount Sinai. The mountain, that's a big, important mountain to the Jewish people. That's where Moses went up. He got the Ten Commandments. They're all just kind of camped, hanging out there. And God is teaching them, here's how to be holy. These are the things that you as a people need to do if you want to be a holy people. And so this time, Numbers starts out with a census, essentially is what it is, that, hey, everybody, let's count. How many people made it out of Egypt? How many Israelites are there? There's 12 tribes. You guys remember the 12 tribes, right? They're descendants of Jacob's 12 sons. I just checked to see the math. There's between 32,000 and 74,000 in each of those tribes. Okay, did you get the total? 603,550 men. I guessed, let's say, we're just going to call 1.5 million people are now living in the desert out at the base of Mount Sinai. 1.5 million people is a lot of people. They counted guys 12 years old and older that are eligible to serve in the army. That's kind of how they decided to count. That boggles my mind. 1.5 million people camping in a desert together. I think it's easy for us to just, I don't know, whenever I picture this scene, I go back to like little flannel graphs that I learned when I was a kid, and I picture like 4 or 5 guys hanging around a campfire, but it's 1.5 million people that are living in the desert together. I struggle to, how do we feed everybody? How do you feed 1.5 million people in a desert? How do you tend to the sick? Like, where do you put the sick people? Where is the hospital tent, I guess? Who is the doctor that's in charge of babies being born to 1.5 million people? Then don't forget that there are leaders who are receiving messages from God, and they have to farm those messages out to 1.5 million people. Think about the hygiene issues in a group that big. Let's not think about the hygiene issues. Let's just move right on past that and go, I bet that was interesting. So God tells Moses, let's get the people organized, which I think is very interesting. The tabernacle, you guys remember the tabernacle. The tabernacle is just like a tent, basically, a special tent that God gave the Israelites very special rules, like here's how you build this thing. And the tabernacle goes right in the center of the camp, like dead in the center. The Levites are the priests, one of the 12 tribes. They are the guys that are in charge of the tabernacle. No one else is allowed to just approach the tabernacle and walk right up. So the Levites, the priests, are kind of a buffer between the tabernacle and the rest of God's people. The other 12 tribes, they all camped in groups of their own tribes. Did you guys read it? They're sort of in cardinal directions. He said, you 3 tribes, you guys camp on the east. You 3 tribes go to the west, you to the north, and you to the south. Did anybody notice my math error? I scratched my head about this one, and I have to admit, this is one of those things that I thought, how long have I been following Jesus, and I'm just now mentioning this? There are the tabernacle, the Levites, who's one of the 12 tribes, and then there are 3 to the east, 3 to the west, 3 to the north, and 3 to the south, which makes 13, right? Now, here's how this works. Actually, I don't want to go too far into this, but you guys know that Joseph was one of the sons. He had 2 boys, and those 2 boys inherited their dad's portion. So there really is 13 of the 12 tribes, but 2 of them are from the same dad, or have the same dad. Does that make sense? So it's 12 people on top and then 2 people on the bottom, the next generation down. And I thought, well, that is very interesting. I have no idea how I missed that all this time. So those 2 sons split Joseph's inheritance. So do you guys have a picture in your mind? Like I kind of pictured a plus sign, tabernacle, Levites around the middle, and then north, south, east, and west. And they had very specific directions on when it was time to move. They didn't just decide, well, it's good weather today, let's head, east. God told them it's time to stop camping, and it is time to camp. At night, during the day, it looked like the tabernacle was like covered in a cloud. At night, the cloud looked like it was on fire. When the cloud lifted off of the ground, that is when it was time to move. That's how they knew, like it's time to pack up all of our tents, put our stuff in the suitcases, and lift the tabernacle up, or when the cloud lifted up. That's how they knew. They would walk in a very specific order. Did you all notice this? 6 tribes, Levites, tabernacle, Levites, 6 tribes. They surrounded the tabernacle like it was the thing that you want to protect from either direction. The tabernacle was safe from invaders or whatever danger could happen from both sides, the front and the rear of the camp. There was a passage that said sometimes they marched for a day and sometimes they marched for a month. It just kind of depended on what God told them to do. I thought that was really interesting that the Israelites know the general direction of where they're going, the promised land, but they don't know how many days it's going to take them to get there because God says, we will go when I say it's time to go, and we will stop when I say it's time to stop. And remember, all this time, they are camping with 1.5 million people. Do y'all like to go camping? Raise your hand. Any crazy people in here that like to go camping? Our small group went on a camping trip once. And it was one of the best and one of the worst campouts that I've ever had in my life. We are still telling stories almost every week about this campout that we all went on. We had crazy flies. It was biblical. It was the weirdest thing that I have ever seen, the flies that were at this campout. I still get made fun of for the cream of wheat that I made that could be used as spackle. There was a lightning storm one of the nights that was so bad, I'm not joking, I thought that Evan Gray, who was in his tent with his family and Francesca, our daughter, I thought he was a goner. Like, it was one of those where you see the lightning and hear the thunder immediately, and I thought, I hope Evan and my daughter are still with us, right? He made it. He's still alive. He thought the same thing about us and our tent. Frank and Jess McKelly will never, ever go camping with us again. Ever. We've tried. We've asked them 100 times. They are not interested. They will camp at the Holiday Inn with us, and that's it. I love to camp, but you guys tell me if this sounds familiar. Right around night 5, maybe night 4, the back is tired of sleeping on that tiny little piece of foam that you call a bed when you're camping. One thing that always bothers me, I inherited this tiny little pop-up camper that is older than me, that's true, and I hate when you get down off the beds in the morning and the floor is gritty because it's got everybody's, all the stuff that you just drag into a camper. I hate that. That drives me crazy. There's 100% chance that the Roterts left something at home that is essential for, it seems like it's always a lighter. Every single time we get to the campground, we don't have a lighter, and we're like, well, how are we going to cook or make fire, and the camp store is closed or whatever. It drives me crazy. So the Israelites are, in essence, camping with 1.5 million of their closest friends. And unlike my tiny little camper, they don't have any air conditioning anywhere. Can you imagine? No air conditioning. And there's a giant tent in the very center of camp that they have to haul up. God gave them very specific directions on how to fold it, what sort of cloths you drape over some of the instruments that are used in the tabernacle. So that's the Levites' job. They have to wrap up the giant tabernacle in the middle. You guys imagine the conflicts that would have come up just basic living next to people outdoors for an extended amount of time. I bet it happened all the time. And you guys remember the rules that God gave the Israelites last week when we were going through Leviticus? Do you think that it makes a little more? I thought it makes a lot of sense. If they're camping with each other, they need rules on how to get along with each other. I'm just going to go very quickly through some of the rules that we learned about this week, and I'm only going to touch on some of them. There were quite a few. I thought it was really interesting that God gave them rules about restitution. So if I damage something that you own, not only do I have to give you the amount of the item, the amount that it's worth, but I also have to add a fifth of the value on top of it. It's kind of like a tax, a punishment or whatever, and I thought it was really interesting because it's not that money just goes in the tabernacle coffers. The money goes to the Levites, the priests, who God said, hey, you guys cannot work. Your job is to work for God, essentially. The Levites' job was to process the sacrifices. It was to interpret God's law. And they got that 1/5 extra as compensation. That was their salary, essentially. That's how they lived. Every now and then we get this little glimpse of how the economy worked in ancient Israel, and I think it's very interesting. There was a whole section, a whole chapter we read on how to make a promise to God. Did you guys read that part? A Nazirite vow is what it was called. And it was a promise that you would do something, and the promise was made in the presence of God. So much more serious than just a regular promise, I think. And they had to promise certain things when they were when it was the time frame when they were fulfilling that vow. No wine, no haircuts. They had to make a sacrifice at the very end of the vow, and everyone around you knew what you were doing, which I thought was interesting. Like physically, I would see that your hair is long and you're not drinking wine, and that would make me go, oh, they made a promise. And I almost saw some accountability in that. Like, everybody knows that Lalo just made a promise, and so we're going to make sure he keeps that promise. The Israelites, every single tribe brought gifts to the tabernacle that they, like the instruments that they would use in the, oh no. We're fine. We're good. What page? Found it. We're going to skip that part. Oh. God repeated the rules to the Israelites about celebrating the Passover. You guys remember Passover, right? Every single year at a very specific time of the year, God said, I want you to remember what I did for you when you left Egypt. And the Israelites came to them with an exception. They said, hey, hold on a second. What if we're unclean the day that Passover comes around? Because remember, it's the same day of the year every single year. And Moses went to God and asked him, hey, listen, some of the Israelites want to know, what happens if we're unclean and it's time for Passover? Do you know what God said? Wait a month. You can postpone your Passover celebration if you have done something accidentally that makes you unclean. And I thought that was really interesting because it's tempting for me to see all of these rules as like very, very rigid, and I think to some extent they are. But God also allows for, hey, life happens. Like, what happens if someone dies in my presence and I wasn't expecting it? That is something that would have made them unclean and unable to celebrate the Passover. But God said, you have to celebrate the Passover every single year. God said, just wait 1 month from when Passover normally is. So I was like, that's interesting how there was some give and take, and that Moses went straight to the Lord to get the clarification. I thought that was, I don't know. Okay, now guys, we have to talk about this Numbers chapter 5. There's a test to see what to do if you suspect that your wife is unfaithful. Did you guys read that chapter? That was a hard one. It was a head scratcher. Here's how, I'm going to do a quick summary. You guys got to go and read it though, okay? Because I don't know what else to say. If a man suspects his wife of being unfaithful, then he is to bring her to the priest, and they stand before the Lord. And then there's sort of a ritual kind of thing that they have to do. And then the priest takes I'm quoting this right from Leviticus, or from Numbers. The priest takes dust from the tabernacle floor, mixes it with water, and makes the woman drink it. And if her stomach swells, she's guilty. And if it doesn't, she's innocent. I'm leaving out some of the details. And I was talking to Heidi about this, and this is not a joke, not intended to be funny. It almost sounds like the Salem witch trials, where people get accused of things, and how are you supposed to ever make it out of that accusation? So I want to be really careful about how we deal with this. What are we supposed to do when we get to a chapter like Numbers chapter 5, and we're just not sure what to do with that passage? The first thing I think that is totally okay to do is for us to read it and to scratch our heads and then just move on with following Jesus. I don't know that we have to have immediate answers for here's exactly what God was thinking. I mean, as if we could know what God was, his thoughts are so much bigger than ours. I think it's okay for us to see this as a kind of a cultural oddity that's very, very far removed from us in Rockford in 2026. Second, I don't want things like this to be harmful to your faith. Do I think it's odd that this is a test for unfaithful women but not for unfaithful men? Yes, I do. I don't understand why that is there. But do I make the leap of saying that God is sexist? No, I do not. I think in all of this, it's so easy for us to take our culture and try and wedge it into what the Bible says. But instead, I want to use the Bible to inform my culture. I want to do the opposite. The third thing is I don't think we base huge chunks of theology based on what is never again mentioned in Scripture. This is the only time that this ritual is ever mentioned. So let's not go find Don's vacuum cleaner and mix it with water and accuse our wives of unfaithfulness. We talked about this the last 2 weeks. We are not the primary audience of this book. We are looking over the shoulder of God speaking to the Israelites. Be careful, though. I'm not saying let's just throw away any passage that sounds foreign or is difficult for us to understand, but I do think it's okay for us to be okay in our not understanding. I think it's okay for us to sometimes shrug our shoulders and say, I'm not quite sure what God was trying to get across. But here is one thing that I thought of. In this ritual, God has control over whether or not the woman gets sick, right? Isn't he in control of our bodies? It's not something that the priest could control, the husband could control, the wife could control. It's totally out of any kind of human justice. And I see that God is sort of taking baseless accusations off the table. I think that God is protecting women from what could destroy their lives, an accusation of being unfaithful when she's not. And he's saying, I'm going to take care of this and make sure that I am the one who decides the verdict in the situation. So that's kind of an overview of the things that we read for this week. This is a hard 9 chapters that we did. As I was thinking about this passage this past week, I just keep picturing the picture of the Israelite camp as they went from place to place, with the tabernacle at the center and the Levites around that and the tribes in a cross shape on the outside. The tabernacle was in the very center. That's the hub where God's presence was located. God lived in this tent. The Levites, that's the tribe that's supposed to surround the tabernacle, they're kind of like a buffer between God and God's people. In some way, and then the other tribes spread out from there. In some ways, it's laughable to think that God would fit in a tent, isn't it? I don't know what kind of process God had to go through to reduce everything that he is down into a cloud that fits inside of a tent. I don't know what that process was like, but he did it because he wanted to be near his people. The God of the universe who created everything squeezed himself into a tent so he could be by the Israelites. That's what he wanted more than anything else. We talked about the marching orders, how they surrounded the tabernacle with their physical bodies to make sure that was the most important thing that was protected at all costs. And I can't help but see, I thought a lot about this, that our lives are to be arranged just like the Israelite camp was arranged. You guys ever seen that illustration of how you're supposed to make things, how you determine what a priority is in your life? And you take a big glass jar, and you have a jar of sand, and you have a jar of big rocks. Have you guys seen this illustration before? And if I take sand, which is the little things in my life, and I pour it in first, then you pour the rocks in, and the rocks don't fit. You guys have seen this before, right? But if you take the big rocks, which represent the big, most important things in our life, and we pour it in first, then you pour the sand in, and the sand fills in all the cracks, and suddenly everything fits, and your life is order. Boy, it would have been really smart for me to actually do that illustration, wouldn't it? Instead of describe the illustration, but I didn't do that. I think that if you put things in your life in the right order, so you get the important things in first, then other things kind of fall into place, like because we've made the important things the important things. John chapter 15 is a verse that came to my mind. I'm going to read it for you. This is the very first part of the chapter, and these are the words of Jesus. He says, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, so that it will be even more fruitful." Are you guys picturing this in your mind? Picture a grapevine. "You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me." Verse 5, "I am the vine and you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples." One of the purposes of the Christian life for us as followers of Jesus is to produce useful things in God's kingdom. We are to be fruitful. And the only way that we can do that, the only way that the big rocks and the sand fit inside of our life is if we stay connected to Jesus. He's the vine, we're the branches. Sometimes I wonder, I thought about this, if when we say stay connected to Jesus, I wonder if it's something that we just say and we don't really think about very much. What does that mean to stay connected to Jesus? It can't be a physical thing, right? Like an actual grape branch connected to a vine. Jesus isn't here. So what is it that we need to do to stay connected to Jesus? Well, if I want to be connected to someone, I'm going to have to spend time with them. That is absolutely essential. How can we spend time with Jesus? Heidi and I share a Google Calendar. Is there any Google Calendar people in this room? Oh, my word. It's just boxes of color all over the place. You guys know what a Google Calendar looks like. Or maybe some of you guys have one of those whiteboards where you write all the family events that have to go, and mom and dad get one color, and the kids get another color, and it's hard to follow. If we didn't have one of those tools, ask Heidi, I would miss appointments all over the place. Just because it's hard enough for me to keep track of my schedule, much less Francesca and Heidi's. I hope that it's not too much of an oversimplification. I don't think that it is. But is it even possible for us to find actual time to spend with Jesus because the way our calendars look? God's presence was like the physical center of the Israelites' life in this phase of their history. Is God present in the same way in our lives? Is he at the middle? Do you and your family talk about God's word in like a regular, structured way? Or does that happen kind of spontaneously without any real thought or intentionality behind it? Do you spend time in prayer, regularly speaking and listening to God, or just simply resting in silence in his presence? Or does that just kind of get wedged in between meals and maybe before bedtime if you're not too tired? Do you seek opportunities to serve with your spouse or your kids or even your small group, or does that take backseat to soccer practice or the next kids' musical? I'm just looking at like raw minutes that you have on your calendar. How much do we spend on the various activities that make up our lives? What wins when you stack up, like to add everything all together in one big year? This is what I spent my time on. What gets the most amount of time? That's got to reflect how central God is in our life, isn't it? I mean, honestly, if you just show up here 52 times a year, which is a lot, it's 52 hours out of an entire year. Like, it's nothing. It's a drop in the bucket compared to all the other time that we have to spend on things. If we zoom out and we look at what we spend our time on in any given year, it has to at least indicate, are we actually connected to the vine or not? If you all look at your calendar and things seem out of whack, which I think happens to all of us from time to time, then fix them. Remove things from the calendar so that you, as a family or as a small group or as a disciple hour class or any group of people in the church, so that you have margin, so that you can fit God into the center of everything. I think oftentimes we see busyness as something that's like forced on us, as if something like we don't have any control over our schedules. We have a lot of control over our schedules. We can say yes or no to the various things depending on whether or not we are off balance, depending on whether or not we are actually connected to the vine. I also thought a lot about the priests that are surrounding the tabernacle, the Levites. They had this very specific job. It was super detailed, spelled out for them. They received and they processed all the sacrifices for the Israelites. And we talked about that. Just an absolute bloodbath that must have been. They received and they taught, and they probably interpreted God's laws for the people. They had to pass out the 10 Commandments to 1.5 million people. They didn't have any other job to do other than taking care of the tabernacle and representing God to his people. And the New Testament, I really sat on this passage for a long time this week. He changes that in the lives of us, of New Testament believers. Peter, the apostle who's with Jesus, he wrote this to the earliest Christians who were scattered all over the place to avoid persecution. This is what he said to them. But you are a chosen people. Do you know the next lines? A royal priesthood. We're the priests now. God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. That is an incredible thing to tell a group of people who used to be Jews, who are still kind of Jews and trying to figure out what it means to be followers of Jesus now. They're just brand new baby Christians. You guys don't remember all the rules that the Israelites had to follow? One of the 12 tribes, a very small part of the Israelite people, that they are the only people that could ever be priests. But now Peter is saying everybody's a priest. Christians no longer needed a group of people to stand in the gap between God and people. That was not necessary anymore. And I think that we kind of inherit that role that the Levites had. We are still called to stand in the gap between God and the people who do not yet know him. That's our job. We are still called on to remind the people, other believers, of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. We still remind each other of God's laws, and here's what it means to follow him. Can I read all the titles that Peter gave you guys? You are a chosen people. God picked you. You are a royal priesthood. Every time Francesca leaves the house, I ask her the same question. Well, I tell her the same thing. Remember whose you are. Francesca, you are a royal priest. So are the rest of you. Every single place you go, you represent God, as a priest would represent God. He says to you that we are a holy nation. He said that to us. There are Christians from every nation in the world, and he says you are a nation. He unifies every single people all over the world. Church, you are God's special possession. You are not a people, but now you are a people. That is us. God called us out of the mess that we were in before we started to follow Jesus, and now we get to be called all of those things. When we put God at the right place, where he deserves to be in our lives, right in the middle, we get to be called a chosen people. God picked us. He picked you. He looked at the entire world and said, I want you to be one of my followers. When God is centered in our lives, we have the right to be a priesthood. We get to stand in the gap between God and people that don't yet know him. When God is where he belongs in our lives, we get to be a nation of people from every tongue and tribe, united under Jesus himself. Can I remind you guys of this? As we read through, we're not done with Numbers. We got more, guys. As we read through some of these more difficult passages, let's be honest about it, let's keep in mind that this is a giant historical lesson that God is teaching us throughout generations of the Israelites. We get to zoom out and see God's hand moving through their history to get to where? Do you remember? Jesus. Like he uses the history of this people to where all of us will look to Jesus and go, oh my word, God has been working all of this out since creation. Like Jesus was not God's like, oh, what am I going to do? Everything's ruined. This was where God has been marching all of human history to get to, Jesus. For those of us who have allowed Jesus to be our great high priest, capital G, capital H, capital P, we get to be grafted in. We are a part of the vine. The God that showed himself as a fog and fire to the Israelites is the same God who wants to be at the center of my life. The God who, it makes us laugh to think that he reduces himself down to live inside of a tent, also wants to live inside of our hearts. He says, sending Jesus to the world isn't intimate enough. I want to send my spirit into the world to live inside of followers of Jesus. That's how intimate God wants to be with us. The stories that we're reading about these passages, they are old, but they become new when we read all of them in light of the cross and in light of what Jesus did for us. Will you all pray with me? Father, I ask that you would give us the mind to think about hard things. Father, that we would rely on your Spirit to wrestle and chew on your word. Father, that we would remember that we are not the first audience, but we are an audience of these words. Father, I ask that you would help us to read all of these passages in light of Jesus. Father, I marvel at generations of people who lived and died just so I can zoom out and see what you have been doing to get to us someday, so that your love would get to Rockford, Illinois in 2026. Father, I'm thankful to be just a very small part of that. God, help us as a church as we march through your word together. Father, the longer we've been doing this, the more excited I am that we are still on track, that we are still looking at your word through like zoomed out lens, and that at the end of, 2.5 more years, we can all say that we did it. We read through your word together. Father, help us to learn what we can and get a better, more accurate picture of you because of it. We pray this in your Son, Jesus' name. Amen.